hope everyone is doing okay tonight. This is Soapbox After Dark. This is another episode. Tomorrow I'm going to be at Fault Lines, and I'm also going to be on By Any Means Necessary. Both channels are on Sputnik. I'm going to be there tomorrow, so I'm getting these videos in tonight because I'm probably not going to be able to get them in tomorrow. I have a really fascinating video to watch. It's like a time capsule. It is a time capsule in which one Bernie Sanders comes across as being absolutely prescient, and one Joe Biden comes across as being rather depraved. This does not age well for Biden. This ages magnificently for Bernie Sanders. If you remember, the 1994 crime bill was that racist law, and I don't use that term that often, but it applies to this because I'm going to give one tidbit of information at the end of this video to put kind of an icing on the cake on how horrendous this law was within the context of African Americans. And they knew it. They knew it. Joe Biden pushed for this law knowing the defect in the law. Just saying. Reading up on this, it annoyed the hell out of me. I was around during this time. And I remember this law, or the very least the hoopla over this, even though I wasn't necessarily into politics. 1994, I think that was a year before I graduated. I'm going to show you two arguments. One argument is by Sanders. One argument is by Biden. And I want to make 2 points at the end of this. This does not look good for Biden. I will say that much. This looks horrendous for Joe Biden. Let's take a look at this. And I'm going to try to do this video in like 10 minutes. So if you see me on and off, that's why. Because I have a few of these that I want to get through tonight. So let's
are saying
expand this. And I found the original version of this also. And I'll put a link to this at the bottom. But let's take a look at one Mr. Bernie Sanders. It's like a time capsule. It's amazing to watch. There.
Portion of them will become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior, but they are in jail.
Just so we're very clear, this wasn't about helping. This was about punishment. In many of the cases, you must understand, mandatory minimums in some cases, the federal government went around giving money away for people to build, for states to build more prisons and enact stricter laws. They gave away billions of dollars for this task. And what did states do? They took them, they said thank you for the cash, and they went about enacting those laws. Putting people in prison for longer prison terms. It was if we punish them harder, we'll get them to stop doing some sort of crime. Let's take a listen to Sanders. Sanders takes a different tact on this.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this so-called crime prevention bill. Mr. Speaker, let us be honest, this is not a crime prevention bill. This is a punishment bill, a retribution bill, a vengeance bill. All over the industrialized world now, countries are saying, let us put an end to state murder, let us stop capital punishment. But here what we're talking about is more and more capital punishment. What we're discussing now is an issue where some of our friends are saying we're not getting tough enough on the criminals. But my friends, we have the highest percentage of people in America in jail per capita of any industrialized nation on earth. We've beaten South Africa. We've beaten the Soviet Union. What do we have to do? Put half the country behind bars? Mr. Speaker, instead of talking about punishment and vengeance, Let us have the courage to talk about the real issue. How do we get to the root causes of crime? How do we stop crime? And Mr. Speaker, I've got a problem. I've got a problem with a president and a Congress which allows 5 million children to go hungry, 2 million people to sleep out on the streets, cities to become breeding grounds for drugs and violence. And they say, we're getting tough on crime. If you want to get tough on crime, let's deal with the causes of crime.
That is awesome. God, that is awesome. Like, one is a raving lunatic, and it's like, I don't care. Biden went so far in that to say he didn't care why people were doing what they were doing. He just wanted to court them off and put them somewhere else to get help. This bill was not about help. This bill was about punishment. There are a few points that I want to make in this. So for the first point, what the bill did. The bill includes federal 3 strikes provision which required mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for those who committed federal violent felonies if they had 2 or more previous convictions for violent felonies or drug trafficking crimes. In his mea culpa August, Clinton said that while most people in prison are under state law, the federal law set a trend, meaning when the federal law went to a particular trend, states followed suit. The bill also had a more direct impact on state prison populations. It included $8.7 billion for prison construction to states that had passed truth in sentencing laws requiring that people convicted of violent crimes serve at least 65% of their sentences. The New York Times at the time noted that those convicted of violent crimes served more than 55% of their sentences, citing Justice Department data. And this went more than just violent crimes, by the way, and I'll get to my point. According to the Department of Justice, 11 states adopted truth in sentencing laws in 1995, 1 year after the passage of the crime bill. By 1998, 27 states and the District of Columbia had eligibility criteria for truth in sentencing grants. Another 13 states adopted truth in sentencing for certain offenders to serve specific percentage of their sentence. The federal government, Bill Clinton's law, set the trend. One of the guys who was part of it made the point, he looks on this crime bill with shame. Here's the federal government coming in and saying, we'll give you money if you punish people more severely, and 28 states in the District of Columbia followed suit with more money enacting stricter laws for violent offenses. But Travis notes all too well that there's a problem with that idea. Researchers, meaning if you punish people harder, including the National Academy of Sciences panel he led, have since found that a modest relationship between incarceration and lower crime rates. We now know that the fullest of time that we have made some terrible mistakes, Travis said, and those mistakes were to ramp up the use of prisons. And the big mistake is the one that we now, 20 years later, come to grips with. We have to look in the mirror and say, look at what we have done. This is somebody who was in right here. Jeremy Travis is president of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. 20 years ago, he attended the signing ceremony for the crime bill. He looks on this with shame. Here's the thing. Why do I call this bill racist? Why do I say that? I say that because there's provisions in the bill that have different sentencing requirements for drugs that African Americans tend to use versus drugs that whites tend to use. And the guidelines was such that a drug that African Americans tend to use, even though it was chemically, for the most part, the same substance, will get 100 times longer sentencing guidelines. Now, this is amazing. Now, you might say, well, how do you know that they knew about this? They knew about this because this was mentioned at the time the bill was being written. This is Thomas Frank. But what is most shocking in our current journal historical understanding of the Clinton years is the idea that the mass imprisonment of people of color was a quote-unquote unintended consequence of the 1994 crime bill, to quote the New York Daily News paraphrase of Hillary Clinton. This is a flatly, glaringly false, as the final ugly chapter of the crime bill story confirms. Back in the early 1990s, although they were chemically almost identical, crack and powder cocaine were regarded as very differently by the law. The drug identified with black users, crack, was treated as though it were 100 times as villainous as the same amount of cocaine, a drug popular by the affluent professionals, meaning the rich. This now notorious 100-to-1 sentencing disparity, as the New York Times put it, has been enacted back in 1986. In 1994, crime law instructed the U.S. Sentencing Commission to study the subject and adjust federal sentencing guidelines as they saw fit. The Sentencing Commission duly recommended that the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity be abolished, largely because, as their lengthy report on the subject confirms, the 100-to-1 crack cocaine powder cocaine quantity ratio is a primary cause of the growing disparity between sentences for black and white federal defendants. By the time their report was released, however, Republicans had gained control of Congress and had passed a bill explicitly overturning the decision of the Sentencing Commission. Bernie Sanders went on record and voted against this bill. The bill went to President Clinton for approval. Shortly before he came to his desk, an inspiring speech deploring the mass incarceration of black Americans. 2 weeks after that speech, Bill Clinton signed the bill. 2 weeks after that speech, however, Bill Clinton blandly affixed his signature to the bill, retaining the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity, a disparity that had brought about the lopsided incarceration of black people. Clinton could have vetoed it, but he didn't. He signed it. And not only did he sign it, people like Joe Biden, knowing this was in the bill, pushed for it. Vigorously pushed for it. So 2 points that I want to make. Bernie Sanders made the point of courage. The reason why you say courage is because it's easy to be tough. Meaning being tough on crime is easy because people don't like crime. So I'm going to be a hard ass about it. It is harder to look at and say, why are these guys acting this way? Meaning every criminal, I've said it before, he's taken my argument, every person who's standing in front of a judge, in front of the public, to stand to account for something that they did wrong, should also have the public standing right there beside them, because the attributes and the behaviors that the individual have portrayed that has got him in trouble, he picked up from somewhere. I'm not saying human beings are blank slates, but I'm saying that the things that they take into themselves and agree with and enact upon the larger world are things that they appropriated from the larger world. They didn't get it from the ether. They got it from the society and the environment to which they grew up in. That society to which they grew up in is society at large, or at the very least a subculture of society at large. But I'm saying what allowed that person to be that person is in the society itself. And pretending as if this is some kind of atomized individual. If you have a huge spike in crime, then it's not that much of an individual now, is it? If you look at it as a collective. I guess I'm saying Sanders' argument in this idea of, look, you look for the root cause, makes more sense. Yeah, it makes more sense. I'll leave it at that part. The other part. When Biden was making, if you listen to what Biden is saying when he starts this off, because I want you to hear this part.
Wedlock, without parents, without any conscience, born out of wedlock, without parents, without any conscience developing, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior, but they are in jail.
The rhetoric that Biden is using here is problematic, seeing as that disparity, that 100-to-1 disparity ratio is in that bill, and that with that disparity in place, African Americans who are going up on charges get longer sentences. Biden knew this was the case. Now Biden is making this argument about cordoning them off and putting them in jail and super predators and everything else. And when you look at the bill and you see that level of disparity within the bill itself, you have to ask, is that who Biden is talking about? I don't think people are insane for looking at this and saying this bill was problematic, and that Biden's and Clinton's push for this bill is somewhat troubling. And last point. Results-based governance as opposed to ideology. Now, what I mean by this is, results-based governance. What I mean by this is, I want something to take place, meaning I want to be able to accomplish something within the larger society. And trying to accomplish that, how do I go about trying to accomplish it? In our political discourse, oftentimes what we have is ideological bending, meaning it's predetermined. So for the Republicans, it's always a tax cut. Doesn't really matter what the problem is. The answer is always a tax cut. It's predetermined. It's entirely ideological. Same thing with the Democratic Party. Ideological, especially on issues of finance and issues of war. I'll give you an example. If the goal of the United States was to boost democracies and support democracies around the world, it wouldn't have gone about toppling those governments, toppling those democracies. If your goal is a results-based approach to governance and foreign policy that dealt with democracies, you wouldn't go with this thing of toppling those democracies. A better one, or better example, would be Obamacare. For the most part, you have a problem. How do you provide health care for all of the people of your country? You have millions, tens of millions, without health care. How do you make sure that people get the health care that they need and that they require? Obama went about with this utopian idea that you're going to have to keep insurance companies in the mix. Drug companies still are going to be in the mix. And in doing this, he essentially went with this thought that I can somehow get the best of both worlds, where corporations can continue to make millions off of the illnesses of the society itself, and the society itself will still somehow be grateful for this. This is utter nonsense. A more reality-based approach would be to look around the world and say, how do you apply healthcare for the best cost? Meaning, how do we make sure all of the people in this country have access or have healthcare? When they need a doctor, they get a doctor free at the point of service. How do you do that? And you go about trying to get the people who are in the know to figure out how you do it. And then you proceed in doing it that way with this bias towards making sure that it is the best for the population itself, because after all, the point of healthcare is healthcare. Trump, again, purely ideologically bent, went with this idea of Trump care. It wasn't the best for anybody. It was the worst of both worlds. I guess I'm trying to make this point that there's a difference in results-based, scientific, research-based legislation, as opposed to being purely ideologically driven in your capacities of writing legislation. I give you another, tax cuts. How do you stimulate the economy? Well, you stimulate the economy by giving money to the people at the bottom who's going to dump their money immediately into the economy. But that's not Republican dogma. Republican dogma is tax cuts. So what they do is, we're going to pass a tax cut and we're going to give tons of money to people who don't need the money. And because it's ideologically bent, it doesn't turn out to support anybody. In fact, everybody that I know has gotten less money back on their taxes because of Donald Trump's tax cuts for the rich. Meaning they put that tax on the backs of us while giving them, people who already have all sorts of means, that much more. Ideological base legislation. This is troubling for Biden, and it will be problematic getting through the primaries with a video like this, with this 1994 crime bill, seeing as how this crime bill has not aged well at all. Bernie Sanders comes out of this, again, prescient. Biden comes out of this, pushing for a depraved bill that at the very least, elements of it was blatantly racist. He pushed for it anyway. So I'm going to end this here. If you guys enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support. through PayPal or Patreon. Wow, I can't believe 100 people are here. All right, well, I'm going to end this because I do have other videos that I want to get to. So if you guys enjoy it, let me know what you think. Am I wrong on this? Is this not a racist bill? Do you believe it is a racist bill? Do you think it's somewhere in between? Give me your opinion. Let me know below. Thanks all. And